are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live chat for March 6th, 2024. Thank you, as always, for joining. I know some of you guys are regulars, and I really appreciate it, especially during this time of year. We start to get a little bit of decline because it's not going to be a blizzard out, and so, most people will start to move away because there's baseball, basketball, rain, stuff like that. But tonight is a special night on several reasons. One, we're going to take a look at our winter forecast. A lot of people don't do this. They usually put out the winter forecast, whatever it is, and moves on. But not here. Here, we're going to go back and take a look at what I wrote compared to what actually happened. And think about what caused the way the winter evolved, answer some of your questions, and also, of course, we'll go over our rainstorm that's moving through right now, the pattern overall. And unfortunately, there are some individuals running around social media land that, for whatever reason, continue to talk about cold and snow weather in the eastern United States because there's going to be a trough. Oh, there will be a trough, but it's the end of March. So we'll talk about that and more. Also, want to let you guys know that X, or formerly Twitter, has finally bestowed upon the feed on X at NYNJPA Weather the ability to add subscriptions. So that's going to be something that we're going to be working on developing. The idea originally was to have this set up for the winter, but I had to wait for them to get it approved. The idea here is that if you want to have a specific forecast for your location, but you don't want all the technical stuff and you don't want all of the discussions, then you can pay to be able to ask that question. Is my plane going to be delayed? Is my birthday party going to be canceled? Whatever. And you could just pay for that. And I will be more than happy to answer that. And that's it. So we'll go with that. We'll go see what that is, how that works out. And again, social media isn't for everybody, but there is a large group that does. And as much as people like to bash X or Twitter or X is going to give it to you, whatever. X Twitter. My wife came up with the word X Twitter, which is very nice. It is one of the leading places for news. Let's look at the baseball, right? Baseball, everyone finds out what's going on. They're literally tracking planes on X to find out where a Japanese baseball player was going to sign. And a lot of our weather information comes out from that source. So you have to utilize it. So I will, along with everything else that I have in place. If you want to just go to the Discord forum, stay away from all the craziness, you go there, talk about weather. Sometimes it gets a little rowdy though, just so you guys know. We try to curtail that, but I'm not everyone's dad. I don't like to go around telling people like, hey, watch your language. But unfortunately, sometimes I have to for whatever reason. So that could be fun sometimes. So now we got all that out of the way, and I know that there's going to be a lot of questions here already starting to fire up about the winter, about the summer, and I see a lot. Oh, wow, there is a lot of people here asking questions on YouTube and everything else. So let's get to it because this is going to be a fun night because I actually enjoyed doing this. I actually liked to look back and see how the forecast went out. And oh, by the way, if you like to get some swag like this, you could definitely go to our merchandise area, which you could see anywhere that you go and check out discussions. On the side here, you can pick up merchandise and wear NYNJPA weather shirt. So why not, right? Or a hoodie. I like wearing those too. So let's talk about the forecast. Now, this was made back in October, okay? Back around October, wrote it around October 15th, issued it around October 20th. And the idea here, we broke it down in tropical forcing, stratospheric forcing, And there are a couple of things that I saw here that would make me say, well, this isn't going to be your traditional El Nino. There's a lot of competing factors here. There's a lot of warning signs, and there's a lot of signs to say, hey, look, this could be a very active year. But I said several times, active, yes. Snowy, I got my concerns. So we start off with El Nino, and the idea here, and again, this has been posted on the public site and the premium site. Public site, of course, is a more limited version without the technical details. Since October, and I haven't taken it down, it will be coming down tomorrow. And I'll just put in the premium dashboard just the spring forecast that has been issued already. Just make it an easier link to follow. The El Nino idea was that sea surface temperature wise, I like the idea of a moderate to strong El Nino. And that is essentially what we got. We got a strong El Nino. But it was an unusual year, as I wrote, because the SOI and the tropical forcing was not acting like a strong east-based El Nino. You had a lot of convection around the date line that continued to fire all winter long. And the SOI remained rather weak, and that actually remained the case throughout much of the winter. We never had the SOI crash. And why is that important? Because that would suggest that there would be a very overwhelming El Nino influence. That isn't what we saw this year. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, if we just do the surface temperatures, that should correlate to El Nino. And that's a very limited and frankly lazy way of looking at how the winter was evolving here, because the evolution of this winter in terms of tropical forcing worked out very, very nicely in terms of the active subtropical jet stream, waves of storms. We pointed out several periods of storm activity, and the idea was that December was going to be dead. Pretty much was, even though I warned several times, look, White Christmas, you're going to see it, almost 0% chance. But your storm potential would be in January, mid-January through mid-February, possibly pushing into March, depending on the evolution of the polar vortex. So when we took a look at the tropical forcing factors and the factors that are going on in the Atlantic, those ideas worked out pretty well. The Indian Ocean idea worked out well. Here's the whole section about the SOI, with it not behaving the way it should for a strong El Nino, which should give warning signs against the idea that El Nino was going to run roughshod over the pattern. But I had my concerns with the non-tropical forcing. So the first thing that really stood out to me that made me concerned about going well above normal snowfall or epic snowstorms, like some individuals were running around saying, was the cryosphere. Because the cryosphere, if you remember back in the fall, was not that impressive. So my concern was that, yes, we'd have our cold shots, we'd have our cold waves, but they wouldn't be as impressive as what they could be during an El Nino year. I was not impressed with the low-level polar and Arctic air mass dynamics. I was not impressed with the evolution of the snowpack in Siberia. And the reason why that's important is that the way that influences your high latitude blocking and the expansion and growth of your polar and Arctic air masses starts to limit your snowfall potential over the northern mid-Atlantic. So if you're well above normal during the fall, that really improves your chances, because then your polar and Arctic air masses are more likely to be stronger, because the Arctic air masses, the Arctic high pressure systems in Siberia start off stronger, more dominant. And when they drive into the mid-latitudes, especially over North America, they remain sustained, and they push that storm track further south. So that was my first warning sign that I gave everyone. Like, definitely active, not convinced on the snowfall, not convinced on the nature of these storms being all snow. I think there's going to be a lot of wintry mix potential, and I discussed that quite a bit in this whole discussion. I should note these observations do not mean snowfall events cannot happen in the northern mid-Atlantic. Still, many winter events will likely feature marginal or manufactured cold air events. So again, this was back in October. I warned that. Stratospheric influences, we talked about the well above normal water vapor that's still in the stratosphere. That's starting to minor out, but it was still a concern in the way that the evolution of the polar vortex would play out. We talked a great deal about the evolution of the polar vortex and how it started off stretched. So I like the idea of disruption of the polar vortex throughout the winter. That idea worked out very nicely. We talked about the EP flux, which was a constant this winter, which led to a lot of stretching, a lot of deformation of the polar vortex, and led to the potential for high latitude blocking. And part of that would be the QBO being an easterly phase. Again, that idea worked out perfectly. The one concern I had with the disruption of the polar vortex was the potential that the way it gets stretched could end up with the blocking being displaced. And I also brought up the point, like, yeah, it's going to be disrupted, but that doesn't guarantee it's going to be disrupted towards North America. So those were some of the concerns. So based on all this data, what I put out for the winter forecast was above normal temperatures dominating the northern tier, which worked out very well, with below normal precipitation. Near normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. It was warmer than near normal, that is for sure. Same thing for the Mid-Atlantic. It was a little bit warmer than near normal, especially for February. We would go into the month-by-month breakdown. Above normal precipitation, that definitely panned out pretty nicely in many locations. Below normal temperatures and above normal precipitation worked out well for the southeast. That pretty much is a hallmark for El Niños. And again, we went into, our region was in Zone 5. And when we take a look at that, Region 5, Zone 5, in this region, the potential for interaction between the polar and subtropical jet stream will be highest, which worked out pretty nicely. Much like other regions, the warmest temperatures for the winter will be in December. That worked out nice. The coldest in February, not so much, and we'll talk about why in a second. With the highest threat for winter storms mid-January through early March, which the idea there worked out pretty well in terms of, again, notice I didn't say snowstorms, but winter storms. Where we started to see our really first storms early to mid-January, another round in February, obviously late February and early March definitely is not working out as we are above normal during that time period. While there is temptation to call for above normal snowfall in these locations, the state of the polar and Arctic air masses, as described, would suggest a mix of snow, ice, and rainstorms this winter that could lead to some locations well above normal, above average snowfall, and others well below normal snowfall based on the impacts of one or two winter storms. So the idea here is that going into the winter, I felt that this winter would come down to one or two storms, whether or not we'd get those blockbuster storms. If we didn't, you end up with below normal snowfall. This year, we ended up with near to below normal snowfall throughout the region. And the reason why is that it wasn't for a lack of storms, as we had plenty of storms, many of them with that wintry mix scenario, but we didn't have that blockbuster storm. And the reason why we didn't have that blockbuster storm is that even though you had all the teleconnections playing out as expected and all your combinations, the problem was the timing of those combinations. As I said way back in October, the one thing that's beautiful about winter storms is that when they come together, it is a beautiful thing because literally every aspect of the atmosphere converges and evolves just right. But if one little thing is off, the idea collapses. The winter storm threat collapses. So this year we had a lot of close calls. But the problem was either the ridge was too far east, The high latitude blocking was a little bit too far northeast by, let's say, instead of the 50-50 low, it was positioned a little bit closer to Greenland. So the blocking was slower to support transitioning towards the coast. Or the ridge axis was a little bit too far to the west on the west coast. And so that led to the storm not interacting with the polar jet stream. Or in some cases, the ridge was getting knocked down too fast and the storm was getting pushed out to the east. So the problem here was the timing throughout the winter of these features. Throughout the winter, we had each one of these features developing, but the timing was just off. And as I said in the forecast, one storm impact, this type of winter pattern is a perfect environment for one or two winter storm impacts that could skew snowfall totals for the region. This type of El Nino forcing and high latitude blocking potential will be capable of producing powerful northeaster winter storms potential in mid-January through February. I would not be surprised if this winter is made by just one or two impressive winter storms, or you miss. So the monthly breakdown was for December to be dead quiet. Maybe an inch on the coast, maybe 5 inches over the interior. And that is essentially what played out pretty nicely. In January, I thought the temperatures would be a little bit closer to near normal. And I thought we'd have one or two storms, moderate storms with potentially 5 inches over the interior, 15 inches along the coast. This is where the snowfall forecast was going to start to fall off because we missed that one major storm. We had a lot of minor storms and moderate storms, but not the blockbuster storm. And then in February, the idea worked out at first. We had that Arctic air mass come in. We had the evolution of the winter storm pattern. And then the pattern collapsed. And the reason why the pattern collapsed was because of the evolution of the polar vortex. We'll get to that in a moment. The snowfall expectations, I was thinking if everything worked out properly, 10 inches over the interior, more than that happened, and 20 inches possible along the coast. In some locations that did happen via mesoscale dynamics, but it didn't happen for a wide region. Again, this is where that blockbuster winter storm idea was going to be missed. Because if you had that storm, you'd get those totals. If you don't have that storm, you don't get those totals. So comparison to average, what you would expect, I thought the interior would be in the 20 to 30 inch range. That worked out pretty well. The I-95 corridor in the 30 to 50 inch range, that did not work out well because we were missing that one or two major winter storms. And New Jersey coast, Long Island, 20 to 40 inch range. Again, that fell short because, again, we were missing that storm. So when we compare to what happened with the winter, as you can see, plenty of activity, but we just did not have the cold air capable of locking in. So we had plenty of storms, but just not the blockbuster storm that you needed to really push those totals to that next level. And so as a result, we ended up to near to slightly below normal over the region. And as far as what could go wrong in that scenario, one of the things I mentioned was the evolution of the polar vortex. And this year, the nail in the coffin for February, as you know, is that, yes, we had a major disruption in the polar vortex. We still do. We'll get to that in a moment. But the initial disruption ended up to push the polar vortex towards Russia and Western Eastern Europe. And so as a result of that, all your winter weather went in those locations, and we ended up with a mild pattern. And that is what pretty much put a kibosh to the rest of the winter weather pattern once we got past roughly around February 20th. That was it. It was done. Over. And so that is what killed the end of February and early March, where we could have made up some of those snowfall totals. The disruption idea, the potential of it worked. The El Nino idea worked. But the location of that disruption, that one factor combined with our marginal polar and Arctic air masses, which was a correct idea, basically eliminated the potential for that above normal snowfall potential. If that polar vortex had broken up and ended up towards North America, right now we would be talking about one or two additional winter storms. But that didn't happen, as you know. So the way I would look at this winter forecast is I had a lot of ideas right, some ideas wrong. The snowfall idea failed, but I already built into the forecast what would happen if we didn't have the major storm and the miss as a result of that. So I felt that I warned people of that potential. But at the end of the day, the thing that makes seasonal forecasting so difficult is that you can have almost everything nailed down, everything correct, but that one feature goes off the rails, and that basically kills your winter weather forecast. So that's why I always say, take this with a grain of salt. I don't charge for these forecasts. I put them out to the public for free because I feel that we aren't at the point in terms of technology, in terms of research, to charge, at least from my opinion, to charge this type of forecast because there's far too much volatility. I'd rather talk about it in terms of just public, saying what we know, what we don't know, and go from there. But that's how I felt the winter forecast basically played out. I'm happier with this forecast than I was with the one back in 2019 and 20. That one was horrendous. I'm happier than the previous forecast because I feel like that I picked up on clues a little bit faster. The one thing I definitely I'm very happy about is that when I saw that the threats were not going to pan out, I wasn't running around throwing out model guidance from like 360 or 400 hours out from model guidance that you shouldn't use for forecasting storms, like the CFS. Wasn't trying to grasp at straws. It is what it is. This is the factor. This is the potential. We could see a winter storm, and I felt that worked out well. I hope you guys also agree that was the case as well. But that was pretty much our winter that we saw. And the thing that we could take away from this winter is that you can have almost all the factors come together and still miss out. That's why it's so difficult to get those type of epic winter storm years that we all talk about, 95, 96, 2009, 10. Those years are not the norm. Those are the magical years to really, if you love snow or if you're in the snow removal business, that's more of the outlier than the norm. And a lot of people think that, hey, the Northeast, Northern Mid-Atlantic, a lot of winter snow and all that stuff. But in reality, that's more Charles Dickens than reality. So another thing to learn. And of course, one of the major things that we learned this year, and I almost forgot about this, is how much more work we need to do with our long-range seasonal forecasts. If you remember going into the fall, we had the European, the GFS, the CFS, Canadian model guidance, all producing the sustained, locked-in high latitude blocking. And one thing I have never experienced, which is kind of the first this winter, was the model guidance being so strong in agreement and all failing epically for late January and late February. Because during both of those time periods, there was a ton of support for a sustained negative EPO, positive PNA, negative NAO, couple it with a deep trough in the east. And although we had some periods where it came close, it never actually achieved that trifecta that would definitely lead to multiple major winter storms. And the reason why I would say that there was a little bit more confidence this year in that potential, even though I had some doubts, was typically when you have all those models come together like that, that's a pretty strong signal. That's like a big, huge alarm sign, right? So you would say to yourself, wow, all these models are showing the same thing. We must be going into a pretty impressive pattern. In reality, didn't work out. So that's certainly something that we need to check up on and kind of learn from and study, saying, okay, what was in the model guidance that caused that output? And what can we learn from it? What are some of the warning signs that may not actually be reality? So that is something that we definitely learned from this winter. So that's the wrap up for winter of 2023-24. There is no more winter weather threats. We'll talk about that in a moment. In the meantime, well, we have a nice rainstorm. Let me just refresh this. This is from WeatherTap. And you can see, in case you're wondering, because I always get this question, hey, this is computer generated. These fronts aren't reality. These fronts make perfect sense. Down here is your tropical air mass. This is your maritime air mass, transported by this high pressure system. This is your polar air mass back here, supported by this high pressure system. So yeah, it makes sense to have all these different frontal boundaries. And it makes even more sense when you take a look at some of the driving factors of all the precipitation, why we're seeing this strong lifting. So you have here all this heavy rainfall now that's going to be marching its way back towards the region. We have our tropical feed up here. And let's take a look at some of this data here. This is at 850. This is the frontogenesis. Let me zoom out to full ConUS here. Okay, so you have your 850 millibar load, strong frontogenesis right over northern New Jersey and northern Atlantic, lining up pretty nicely to where we have our heavy rainfall. Meanwhile, we have our moisture feed. This is tropical moisture being pulled into this storm. And you can see that very nicely here at 850 millibars with the winds. That moisture is coming in from the Gulf of Mexico and the Bahamas right up into Long Island and Connecticut. And that coincides very nicely with that heavy rain band. We had some of that moisture push into the southern and central New Jersey coast, moving up through Long Island into Connecticut, right about the time as expected during the evening rush hour and a little bit beyond that. So while that is all evolving, we have our trough here that is lifting northward. This is all pretty much driven by the subtropical jet stream with some interaction from the polar jet stream lifting our storm northward. And on the water vapor satellite picture, it's even more impressive. There's our tropical moisture feed. There's our upper level low marching to the northeast. We'll have heavy rain going on through tonight, tapering off for tomorrow morning as this low starts to exit. By tomorrow afternoon, things will start to improve. But you can see in the meantime, this is strong lifting. Now, when you see cold cloud tops like this, what's happening here is that the strong lifting is causing the clouds to go higher in the atmosphere. The higher they are in the atmosphere, the colder the atmosphere gets. When the colder atmosphere shows up on the satellite picture, when the colder cloud tops are, say, that's where we get the colors, okay? What they do is that they put colors to designate how cold these cloud tops are. So the higher they are in the atmosphere, the colder the top is. So we know that very strong lifting is associated with this storm as a result, basically to the north and northwest of the upper level low. And then this is all driven by frontogenesis as we were taking a look at. Over the overnight period, you can see that heavy rainfall is going to continue to lift off into New England, tapering off around the northern Mid-Atlantic. By tomorrow morning's rush hour, we still have a few showers lingering around. Watch out for some minor to moderate ponding on the roadway. But the worst of the conditions are basically right now. By tomorrow morning, still have to watch out for some showers and drizzle, but improving conditions can be expected for the rest of the day. So that's storm number one. We still have another storm on the way. But to understand that storm, we have to understand the pattern that we are in. And this pattern is driven by a very impressive MJO signal. Now, I'm pretty impressed with this MJO signal because this strong MJO signal is going to have a major impact on our El Nino. We'll take a look at this next week, but I would not be surprised by next week we see the temperatures for ENSNO crash, take a huge nosedive with this influence from the MJO. You watch it. Mark my words. We're going to go from El Nino to La Nina very, very quickly through this spring. And the first crash of that is going to show up probably in next week's data. Don't be surprised by that. So that's certainly going to be something to keep an eye on. Now, while this MJO is marching towards phase 6, and this is shown pretty much by all the model guides here in a variety of different ways, but the overall theme is that the MJO marches from phase 4 to phase 5 and 6. And so what that generally does is that it starts to push the storm track more towards the Great Lakes as we head towards the end of March. And then by the middle, should I say towards the end of March, what you'll start to notice is that we'll get support for a trough in the subtropical jet stream over the eastern United States. And of course, naturally, people are getting excited over that for whatever reason. Now, at the same time, the polar vortex just gets obliterated. It gets blown up, okay? The winds have completely reversed. We are seeing complete destruction of the polar vortex, but it's spring. So yes, we do see a return of high latitude blocking. We do see a return of a trough in the east. We do see the support for maybe even a negative NAO, maybe even a storm. And so that's how you get this signal showing up here. And a lot of people are pointing this out. Like, hey, look, there's going to be a major storm potentially by around March 20th and going to be cold temperatures. Well, slow your roll here. Yes, we will see below normal temperatures. But remember the theme. The theme here is that these polar and Arctic air masses that do try to drop in have limited shelf life. Why? Well, for one, the sun angle. It's late March by this point, ladies and gentlemen. So you need perfect timing for any type of surprise. And while that's all happening, the collapse of the polar vortex is not the same type of collapse as what you would expect in January. We can get sustained high latitude blocking. The whole pattern is in a state of change. And the reason why is because we're moving into spring. So we're getting a higher sun angle. The stratosphere moderates a little bit faster. The troposphere is moderating a little faster. You do not have the capability of sustaining your high latitude blocking. Your polar jet stream is losing its punch. It's starting to retreat northward because the polar and Arctic air masses are moderating faster. So you see this signal, and I'm sure it's already floating around on social media all over the place. I know that. And you see this, and someone says cold. No. You have to take this per the average by this time of year on March 21st. What is that average? Well, let's take a look at the European Ensemble's forecast by the time we get to that point. Your average during that time period is basically around 50 degrees, say between 50 and 55. Your low around that time period is between 30 and 35. Let's give it your average. So your below average forecast is basically in the upper 40s. Maybe you might get precipitation at night if things work out just right. And in that case, you have a marginal polar air mass with a warm ground already because you've been in the 50s and 60s for weeks. So anyone running around saying cold and snow for late March or epic pattern or anything of that nature, they're doing it to basically get your attention, possibly pay for it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just putting that out there. But it is nonsense. It's definitely a chilly late March, early spring pattern. Not going to disagree with that. Chilly and wet. Maybe. But also, when you take a look at this pattern, let's look at some of the details here. Just to play devil's advocate. Let's pretend this is January. And I did this with the premium members. So some of you premium members, you might be saying, hey, I read this. So I understand. Here's the problem with this pattern when we look at it. And this is how you really want to be able to understand the details. Yes, this is a negative NAO. Absolutely. Yes, you have an upper level low. But it's not a 50-50 upper level low. This thing's based over Quebec. Kind of matters. But the important thing is this ridge. This ridge is too far west. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like much of the winter, right? Where the ridge axis was just not in the right position. When you do winter storm forecasting or winter storm weather pattern forecasting, and the reason why I was always like, oh, maybe. I really was never enthused when we get into the 5 to 10 day period because I would always see this. This is garbage. Why is it garbage? Again, let's pretend it's January. The ridge axis is too far to the west, which means this trough is too broad, which means any disturbance that tries to interact with this polar trough ends up doing so out in the western Atlantic. It misses the boat completely. Now let's bring this back to reality. It's late March. Your polar air masses are already going to be moderated by a Pacific influence from your subtropical jet stream. Not only that, but based on this ridge axis and the time of year of this pattern changing because of the influence of spring, any storm that develops is more likely going to be out in the Atlantic than on the East Coast. And if it does form on the East Coast, it most likely would be a rainstorm. If you're looking for snow, go to northern New England. That's where you can find it. So there, I told you that for free. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to go and subscribe to anything because I don't believe in basically making you pay for hype and nonsense. I don't understand where some of these people are getting this stuff. So again, as we look at our pattern, we got our next storm coming up on Saturday night into Sunday. This storm has the strongest upper level features towards the St. Lawrence River Valley, which basically tells us when we're dealing with what's called a triple point. Notice the moisture here kind of looks like a triangle here. So you have your low pressure system up here with an included front right about here. Your cold front's back here. Your warm front's right about here. And so you get this triple point setting up right over the northern mid-Atlantic. You can see that pretty nicely here in the temperatures. So you can zoom in here. You can almost see the triangle. So you have this polar air mass back here, maritime air mass here, tropical air mass trying to push northward. So you get like this included front. And so what you end up with on Saturday is basically a wave of low pressure developing right over the region, producing maybe a half an inch, an inch and a half of rain on Saturday night into Sunday morning. Beware of urban flooding and small stream flooding in some of your backyards and basements because we've seen a lot of rain recently. Water table is, it's not overwhelmed by any way, shape, or form, but it's starting to get a little up there. And some locations are already starting to see where the ground's already starting to pond. Guess what? This is going to be an issue until we get rid of our El Nino influence. So let's say April still has that threat. Then we go into our La Nina influence. So once that storm leaves, then we kind of get a little bit of a break outside of a minor cold front or two until we get our next storm, which is where everyone's starting to point at when they pull up the 500 millibar maps, but not actually look at temperatures, the evolution of the pattern, all that other stuff that we just went through. And yes, there's another rainstorm, maybe around March 17th or 18th, that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And then we get another break after that. So we'll see how that plays out. Now that I've gone through all that, now I am going to take all of your questions. Looks like we have quite a bit here in the premium chat room. I'll get to all those. After I get done with the premium chat room, then I will, of course, answer all of your questions on YouTube, and Twitter. Oh, we have a lot of questions on Twitter? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, let's get to it then. Let me go right to the camera. Okay, so let's see here. One question from last week that I missed. When will your tropical forecast be out? That probably will be early May. Maybe a little earlier, depending on how La Nina plays out. Kind of giving a little foreshadowing there. No Twitter, X account, no social media stuff. Hate the stuff. I understand social media isn't for everybody. Look, I'll be honest with you. If I didn't run this company, there is no way I'd be on social media. All right, well, maybe I might have an account to follow the Mets. That's pretty much about it. But in order to be in meteorology, doing what I do, you have to be involved in social media, which sometimes can be pretty interesting. As I say, social media is the realm where your crazy uncle can show up and have a huge microphone. You know, it's like, all right, the crazy cousin's saying some crazy stuff once again. So, you just gotta deal with it. Rob Allen asks, evening, Stephen. I'm getting very intrigued by the summer tropical talk going around. I know you mentioned the idea of hot and humid this summer, but I've been seeing talk if the negative NAO holds this tropical season will be rough north of Carolinas with anticipated volume this summer in the Atlantic. Do you agree? The one issue with the reason why we're seeing a sustained negative NAO now is that we've been dealing with a sustained easterly QBO. And of course, the disruption of the polar vortex. But the QBO is about to change. And so that might actually put an end to the sustained negative NAO pattern that we've been seeing. So I'm less confident of seeing that continue on through the summer. But I will say, when you have a negative NAO pattern and you have any type of tropical system near the Bahamas, watch out. That can lead to some serious problems for the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic. But I'm less confident in the idea of sustained negative NAO because I think that the stratospheric influences that would support that are disappearing, and the sea surface temperatures are above normal, but not exactly traditionally supporting of a negative NAO. But I can't rule it out. But I'm not convinced of a sustained one at that. It seems that the subtropical jet is still roaring even with El Nino rapidly fading. Is it possible that with the water vapor from Tonga, while much more spread out but still in the stratosphere, that we see a repeat of La Nina with a stronger than normal subtropical jet stream? I think that the stronger than normal subtropical jet stream, and this is just my theory, is connected to the higher levels of precipitable water, which is increasing the gradient that we're seeing in the atmosphere in the water vapor, so the water vapor pressure gradient, and the thermal gradient. And as a result of that, I think that we're seeing a more robust subtropical jet stream regardless of ENSNO. So I don't like using El Nino or La Nina as a measure of the subtropical jet stream strength over North America. Certainly over the tropics, that works out pretty well. It still does, with La Nina supporting a very weak influence and low shear over the tropical Atlantic, which is going to be a problem for us if the sea surface temperatures remain as warm as they are. But it displaces the storm track. So what happens is that the storm track ends up towards the Great Lakes, let's say cutting up from the southern plains towards the Mississippi River Valley and the Great Lakes, where we would see a lot of severe weather outbreaks. Steve, the forecast would have been great if the polar vortex didn't go to Asia. I agree, absolutely, for lengthy periods of time, and misaligned even when pointed towards North America, resulted in ridges being too far west or east. Yes, that's literally we had time periods where the polar vortex stretched towards us, but it was just a hair, literally a hair too far to the west, which displaced the whole pattern, and not by much. So it was certainly a frustrating year in that respect. We would have had 40 to 50 inches mid-February through March if the PV not went over to China. Yeah, I agree. Now, what happened with the model forecasting in terms of the seasonal forecasting, I mean, I didn't base the forecast on that, but it made me more confident in what I was writing. The type of failure that we saw for January and February from those seasonal models is concerning and something that really needs to be looked into. Actually, all your snowstorms in the interior were all snow, which is nice, not having mixed. Yeah, the idea of the mix idea, again, was more towards the coastal plain. Yeah, there were some areas, and I definitely said this, where you would get all snow. But there were also, I think you would agree, even when you had all snow, you had some sleet mixed in, and the environment of the thermal gradient, the thermal environment that produced those snowstorms wasn't exactly the best. Weather and real estate share the same fundamental principle: location, location, location. Yep. I said it a couple of years ago that I think it is true. A lot of people got really spoiled by the run of winters with a lot of big snow, and simply not normal in the mid-Atlantic. You know what's normal is that you get a lot of years where you get almost nothing, and then a lot of years where you just get bombed with snowfall. And you can see this in our climatology quite a bit, where we get these periods where we just get literally nothing. You can't even, you have to go to Alaska to get the snow. And then all of a sudden you get these other years where you think that the pattern doesn't support it, and it just keeps on snowing. And part of that is just comes down to how the timing. Remember, a lot of this comes down to fluid dynamics, where one little feature, once it clicks in and sets up a pattern, it just keeps on repeating itself. So if you can get a storm to lock in a pattern, you can get 3 or 4 storms to follow it that just keeps on hitting you with snow. On the reverse side, if you get one storm that's just a little bit off, that theme continues on for all the other storms. And it's really hard to pinpoint when that actually happens. Over the past month, in addition to the polar flares indicating tightening on the magnetic field of the sun at the poles, the sunspots are getting closer to the sun equator. Another sign the sun's closing in on solar max. Yeah, we'll definitely cover that next week. I think that we're probably going to see that solar max sometime this year. But we'll see how it plays out. So why were the models in all agreement and fail? I don't know yet. I know that there's some research going into it, but I don't know yet. I suspect there might have been some miscalculation in the influence from Siberia, but I don't know that answer completely. If I did, if I knew it beforehand, trust me, I would have used it. I wonder if the water vapor from Tonga impacted the polar vortex disruptions. There is some factor to that, but I don't think it's the primary one. How much rain do you think we'll get this weekend? About 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. I'd definitely watch out for your basements. Except let's see. Steve, what have we learned from this year that will help forecast next winter? Some of the things I learned is when you're, first of all, communication's key. Don't get too far ahead of yourself in terms of the seasonal data. I was never a big fan of trusting seasonal data, but I have to admit I got a little bit blinded by all the strong agreement, so I probably won't do that again. The idea of what causes the forcing worked out well, but that doesn't always mean that that's going to transpire. Let's see here. And also, I think that we need to do a lot more studying on the rules involved with tropical forcing, because the signals that we used in the past to study El Nino and La Nina, like the SOI, like convection, like the MJO, does not appear to be playing correctly. We've seen a huge disconnect between forcing parameters and the nature of the sea surface temperatures. And I think part of that is because we have a well above normal sea surface temperatures in the Pacific dominating, and that throws off your gradients. So you can no longer say El Nino equals X, La Nina equals Y. You have to look at the whole picture, and we have to do a lot more analysis in not just the ends of state, but what is the larger gradient setting up in the Pacific that is influencing the positions of your troughs and ridges, and how does that play into the evolution of your stratospheric influences, and how does that play out? All of it's very complicated, but it's something that we definitely need to study and work on. Let's see. Winter 24-25 early thoughts. I like the idea of a La Nina. That's pretty much all I'm going to say on that. How can we ever attempt to predict next winter? You have to fail. You have to accept failure. You have to take it in and learn from it. This is what we're doing today. If you're afraid to put out a wrong forecast, you always will be wrong because you never try. The only way that we improve is by pushing the forecast, discussing the things that we don't know, what we do think we know, and then go back and look at how that worked out and then figure out why. If you're not willing to be wrong, you will never learn. That is true no matter what you do in your life. If you're afraid to fail, if you're afraid to be wrong, you will do nothing with your life. You will fail at life itself. You have to be willing to get knocked down, to get back up, to be stronger, better, faster. So next winter we're going to try again with the rules that we learned, the observations we learned, and keep on looking at what is going on with our weather pattern. And succeed or fail and move forward. That's the best way I would take it. Observation: groundwater, ponds of water formed rather quickly once it started. Rain on grass, including areas where it usually does not pond without some serious rainfall. So certainly some locations already seen some pretty significant rainfall impacts. Let's see here. Models being so bad this year. How can we trust these models? Well, see, that's the thing. You know damn well that I never said, hey, look at this storm 300 plus hours out. And while I did say that, hey, look, it looks like the high latitude blocking is favorable, I never made any guarantees. Too many people take model guidance like as if it's some sort of crystal ball. It's nothing more than guidance, not a tarot card or not a crystal ball that's telling you the future. It's just guidance. Now, what you're supposed to do is take that guidance, which is what we did throughout the winter, and say, okay, this is what it's showing. Here's what could go wrong. Here's how to prepare for it. That's how you're supposed to use model design. And it's going to become a huge problem with AI because there's this crazy idea that with AI, oh, wow, the winter forecast or the forecast overall are going to be much better. No, AI is only as good as what you put into it. And we're still putting into it human error because humans made it. So that also includes the observations, right? So you cannot use model guidance like an end-all be-all. This is a problem with apps that you have on your phone. It's all based on model data and nothing more. What type of La Nina gets us back to a normal winter? Basically, what you would look for is a weak to moderate La Nina, focused more towards Nino 1 plus 2 and 3. Last week of March sun angles is the same as the second week of September. Exactly. Oh, it can snow. It can snow in April. The issue is this. In order to get snow in spring, you have to have two factors. One, the snow has to start before the sun rises. so we can layer the snowfall on the pavement and allow for that snow to accumulate. And the other thing, you need strong lifting. So as a result, when you get that strong lifting, you end up with enough cooling in the atmosphere to support snow accumulation. Both of those situations are rare, but they can happen. Let's see here. 1970s, given the MJO impact. Let's see here. 1970s were like that regarding going from little snow to a couple big storm events. Given the MJO impacts this year, is the Indian Ocean state another thing that needs to be given more weight in seasonal forecasts? That's something I'm planning on studying this summer. I think it definitely should. I'm trying to get something. Okay, so now I got all of the community chat and premium chat done. I'm going to check out YouTube and then we'll check out X. JMR, thank you for your interests. Let's see. Okay, let's see here. Severe weather, no thoughts on April, maybe towards second half of April. I think April's going to be a transition month. I think it's going to be a wild month in terms of a lot of chaotic pattern changes because of the change of end snow during that time period. Watch out for the plains for severe weather. Let's see here. What do we have on X? Okay. Apparently we have a lot. So let's go check this out. Challenging ones. All right. Let's see what we got. How much do you think what happened this year will continue to next season? Different dynamics. I wouldn't say it's the same thing, but some of the same challenges, especially in the Pacific, and understanding the interaction between La Nina and the rest of the sea surface temperature setup in the Pacific. Why does it seem that models have gotten worse? They actually haven't. The problem is not the models. Trust me, if you guys seen the MRF back in the 1990s, holy crap, every model run was a hurricane. It was much worse back then. And don't even get me started on the NGM. The problem isn't the model guides. The problem is that you have people running out there posting the model data and not having any clue what the hell they're talking about. Some people do it because they're excited and interested, and look, I'm all for it. You know, like young kids and stuff, I get it. You know, I probably would do the same thing if I was 15 years old. But there are some individuals who should know better who are posting garbage. And so it makes it seem like as if the model data is worse. It's not. There are individuals using model data improperly. And probably the worst thing that ever came out was the snow map, especially the 15-day snow map or the 45-day snow map. They're garbage. And it also is garbage to start posting winter storms from the CFS or from the 360-hour GFS. The problem isn't the model guidance. The problem is that some individuals are using it improperly. Let's see. Besides the models will back off any cold, that's a great point. With the cold that's coming up for March, I still like the idea of below normal, but I bet you, in fact, I'm pretty confident that by the time we get closer to that forecast period, that type of cold air mass is going to be significantly modified. So it probably won't be as cold as was being advertised in many locations. You might get a few locations that actually meets that verification. And oh wow, it's already 9 o'clock. Look at that. We did it.
On a roll, babe.
I'm on a roll. Just wait till we start actually getting baseball, because this is one thing we're going to be doing when we have our live chat. We'll have the Mets game on. Sorry, Yankee fans, I'm putting on my Mets game. And, we'll talk about the weather. We'll talk about baseball. Nothing else. I know what year this is. We're not going to talk about it. Because we see enough of that on social media. Thank you very much. And I'd rather ignore it. But certainly, it's going to be a fun spring. This spring, we'll try to have more coverage on severe weather and see how that goes. And a couple other things that are going to be coming up over the next couple of weeks that I'm going to be sharing. That's very, very exciting and a lot of fun. So I think for tonight, it's 9 p.m. I'm going to close it out before I lose my voice, because that would be bad because I got videos tomorrow, right? So we'll close it out for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed the overview of the winter forecast. I know it's kind of rare to do that from a lot of different sources, but I think it's important to do because it keeps me honest, it keeps you honest, it keeps everyone honest and everyone happy. So tonight's the last night that the winter forecast will be up. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to take it down. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the chat. And as always, stay safe out there.